Hello, Middleville staff. This year I decided it was time that we took a little time to really review that overview of PBIS. Why do we use positive behavior interventions and supports both as a building, and why is our district going to be using that across ISD 728? We've been using PBIS or implementing PBIS this will now be year 7, so the last 6 years moving into year 7. PBIS is a research-based framework that is used all across the state of Minnesota and even across the world. It is a building-based team approach and a way for us to build upon existing strengths and allows us to be flexible to fit our school's needs. It is enduring over time as PBIS has really been around since the late 80s, early 90s. It is an evidence-based practice, as I said. It improves students' outcomes. It has shown to reduce the exclusionary discipline, so students being kicked out of spaces, and it has improved teacher outcomes. All of those are research-based, reasons why PBIS works when implemented with fidelity. There are 6 important principles to PBIS. Really the thought that it's a continuum of behavior, academic interventions, and supports. It really is the MTSS or multi-tiered systems of support model. We use data to make decisions and solve problems. We arrange the environment of both our classroom and our school to prevent the occurrence of problem behavior. We teach and encourage pro-social skills and behaviors, and we implement evidence-based behavioral practices with fidelity and accountability. And finally, we screen universally to monitor student performance and then monitor their progress throughout the year. PBIS, as I said, is really about the outcomes. How do we get there? We get there by making sure that we're using data-based decisions. We have supporting practices for students' behavior that are consistent across our building, and also support staff behavior with the systems, again, that are consistent throughout our building. As I mentioned, it is an MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, or an RTI model, similar to what we use in the academic world. Through our school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports, we want 80 to 90% of our students to respond in all settings. We're being preventative and proactive so that we have enough resources, both in staff, time, and dollars, to be able to provide for the other up to 20% of students who need group or individual supports in the area of behavior. This is just a number of examples of different types of practices or strategies that fit within the PBIS framework. For example, our second step curriculum or our social and emotional learning work, relationship building, check-in, check-out. Some of you use the envoy strategies. Those all fit within the PBIS framework. This is just an example. We know that students, as well as ourselves, have all different types of learning in different areas. For example, this student does really well in a large group and when they receive instruction in problem solving, in band, in math, in physical education. But when it comes to behavior such as distracting others or working independently, this student is still working at those and really needs extra support. So much so that it would be that tier 2 support, so small group instruction to help work on those skills. And then they need some tier 3 supports in the area of attendance. They miss a lot of school for whatever reason, and so some very specific supports need to be put in place for this individual student in the area of attendance as well as in English. We all could create our own profile like this. We likely all have things that we do really well and can learn in a large group, but we probably have others where we need extra repetition and even some where we need individual support. Each PBIS building has a behavior purpose statement. Ours is we treat each other with respect, take responsibility for ourselves and our learning, and strive for a safe and positive school for all. And then you can think about how do you use that behavior statement for yourself in your classroom, on the playground, wherever it is that you work. And our three main expectations at Meadowvale, all of our behavioral expectations fall under: we are respectful, we are responsible, we are safe. So here's just a little bit of food for thought as we think about behavior. All behavior really is communication and tells us something. We know that if a child doesn't know how to read, we're teaching them. And we know that if a child doesn't know how to swim, we're going to enroll them in swimming lessons. We're going to make sure that they get taught again. They don't know how to multiply and they get to third or fourth or fifth grade, we're still teaching them. We're reteaching. We're practicing. When a student doesn't know how to drive, we enroll them in classes and we do behind the wheel. We teach. But if a child doesn't know how to behave, if they're struggling with some of their behaviors, are we teaching or are we punishing? And often it's a little bit harder to answer that last sentence. And we need to remember that behavior is a form of communication. And sometimes we need to find out what it is that child is trying to communicate through their behavior and then work to shape that behavior to be more appropriate, to be able to communicate what it is they need, and also just to learn how it is that they need to be behaving that is socially acceptable. So we're going to teach those behaviors. So why would we develop this system for teaching behaviors? Because we know that behaviors are prerequisites for academic success. There are many behaviors that you need to be able to demonstrate appropriately in order to access curriculum. Procedures and routines create structure. So when we teach those behaviors and procedural behaviors and routines, we're creating a structure for students and for ourselves. And we know that repetition is the key to learning new skills, whether those are academic skills or behavior skills. So as you think about that, I want you to think about these three things. When we're going to teach a child something new, think about how many times you think it might need to be repeated for that child to learn. And think about for yourself as an adult. And finally, if a child has to unlearn an old behavior that wasn't socially acceptable or appropriate, and then replace it with a new behavior, how many times does that behavior have to be repeated on average? So let's go back to the child. 8 times, and that's on average. So that's that kiddo that's probably a tier 1 student or a student with a tier 1 behavior, but others in tier 2 and tier 3 might need a whole lot more repetition in order to learn that. Us as adults, 25 times, 25. And for that child to unlearn, we're talking 28. And again, that's on average. So if a student has some special needs or has some of those old behaviors that are maybe still being reinforced at home and now they need to unlearn them here, that can be very, very challenging. So again, thinking about teaching behavior and remembering that just posting that sign up in your classroom is not enough, or posting it by the hallway or on the playground. We have to teach and reteach, because even when we post the sign, if your dog poops, pick it up, please, we can see that sometimes the gentleman doesn't quite understand what the expectation is. So we need to teach those things. Also think about or consider embedding it within your daily curriculum, because again, we're teaching the social emotional skills of, in this case, some of those behavioral skills. So we don't always list what I would say would be objectives, but we definitely list learning targets, I can statements. So we're going to put that up academically, but also consider what is it in Meadowvale, we're Mighty Mustangs, we might have that expectation of be responsible, and then we might list, I can focus on my own work. And once we've done that for a lesson, just like we come back to the academic, can you meet that I can? Hey, how did we do on meeting the I can under our behavioral expectation of focusing on our own work? So consider implementing something and embedding it into your daily curriculum. Then I just want to talk a little bit about acknowledgement, because we know that when we acknowledge appropriate behavior, the chances that it's going to occur in the future are much greater. And this is one of the most powerful tools for shaping or changing behavior. is that positive acknowledgement or that presentation of something pleasant or rewarding immediately following the positive behavior. So why would we want to use acknowledgement? Because it reinforces the teaching of new behaviors. It strengthens and encourages the behaviors that we want to have happen again. And then we just have to remember that every interaction that we get to have with a student is an instructional opportunity that's going to influence what happens next. And that might be an academic instructional moment, but it also might be a social emotional learning moment. And so we want to interact and we want to work on reinforcing those positive behaviors so they occur again in the future. And one way we can do that really easily, research shows that if you can improve behavior by 80% just by pointing out what somebody is doing correctly. So that's one of those examples where if there's a inappropriate behavior that's occurring that you can ignore, it's a small behavior, and then really point out the positive, and another student, when you see the positive behavior, you're going to see 80% improvement in behaviors. So that's an exciting piece of documentation. And then there's always a misconception about rewards. Often the thought is that if we provide a tangible reward, the student will never have intrinsic motivation. And that's just not necessarily true. The research doesn't stand up to that. That instead, when new or difficult social skills are being acquired, so I'm learning something new or difficult, the more teacher and external feedback that I get is going to help improve that behavior. And then as I become better and better with that behavior or that skill, you're going to start backing off, and it's going to become more of a self-managed type of behavior or feedback. And I always equate it to something, and you've heard me say this before, like potty training. We provide lots of reinforcement, lots of tangible reinforcement, and we slowly back off. And eventually that student is able to manage that behavior on their own. So there's some research recommendations for providing recognition for students. We should both be recognizing the effort as well as the mastery. We should make that recognition super specific and aligned to the expected performance and behavior. We need to have more recognition or more positive reinforcement than correction. And we should be pairing that recognition with a concrete symbol. So hence why we're pairing the recognition with the Mighty Mustang ticket. So we're going to use the student's name. We're going to tell them what the behavior is and then tie it back to our school-wide expectations. So an example would be, nice job sitting in your seat, Jay, when the bell rang. Way to be there. That is responsible behavior. So we're stating the student's name, what the positive behavior was, as well as what our school-wide expectation was. Things that don't work for that would be just giving the ticket without saying anything. So just handing them a Mustang ticket. How about handing them a ticket for their birthday? Nope, that would not be supportive of the recognition to shape behavior. And then also, not just giving tickets for the above and beyond behaviors, but rather those that are expected. So, those behaviors that we would want and fit underneath our school-wide expectations. Again, another important feature is the 5 to 1, meaning the 5 positives to 1 correction. So again, how often can I positively reinforce this student versus how many times do I need to correct them? And the 5 to 1 positive to negative doesn't have to always be specific school-wide expectations. It might be a positive interaction, like I'm welcoming you into school. I'm offering you a greeting. I'm asking you if you need support with something. So I'm providing you, that's a positive interaction that we're having, and we want to have 5 of those to every 1 correction that we need to have. But we also know we're going to need to have corrections, and you can find our behavior flow chart in our Schoology course. It will help you to determine what are those behaviors that should be managed in the classroom or by other staff on the playground, wherever that might be. What are those things I'm going to manage versus what are the things that I'm going to work with the office on? And one of the things I really want us to work on and do this year is we need to sit down and we need to, as a team, really define what is disrespect. what are some of those negative behaviors, and what do they look like in a kindergartner versus what do they look like in a fourth or fifth grader? And when are we going to decide consistently as a team that that is an office managed behavior, or that is one that we're going to address in the classroom? So here's an example of something we would do is we'd take a behavior like disruption, and we'd list out together and decide as a team, which are those things that we're going to manage in the classroom and which are those things that we're going to want other supports for. And not that the student always needs to come to the office, but we're going to write an office discipline referral, and together with the office, we're going to determine what is the intervention or consequence that needs to take place. So those are some examples. And then just thinking about, too, also defining refusal to do work. How many times is there a refusal to do work before that does become an office discipline referral? So plan that we'll be working through some of those, and probably starting with the areas that we see most often in our building and then working to those that we see least often. And why that is so important is this statement right here. When everyone handles infractions with instructional correction procedures, students learn that what happens when they misbehave is procedure and not personal. In other words, all of us agree that when this behavior occurs at this level, we're going to address it. So that they start to see, oh, yep, that's just how we do things at Meadowvale, and it's not about me as a person. It's not that that teacher or that staff member doesn't like me. It's about the fact that that is not acceptable behavior. And then just remembering, too, when we address behaviors, and we know we're going to need to and want to and have to in order to help students shape behaviors and make good choices, our goal is never to humiliate or intimidate them. Those are not acceptable behaviors by us as adults, but we want to address those behaviors from a place of care and concern. I care about you. I want you to make good choices. I want to help you have positive behaviors. And we remain calm and talk to students in a private place whenever possible as we work through some of these changing of behaviors. An example, our office discipline referral form looks as it has in the past, and I just remind you that this is not the consequence or not the intervention. This is the form that we collect the data. So it's not one of those, if you do that one more time, I'm going to write you up type of thing, but this is just the data collection tool, and together we work to determine what's the best intervention to help shape that student's behavior into a positive way. So just that reminder, what's the broad purpose? Why again do we use positive behavior intervention and supports? It's really about improving the effectiveness, efficiency, and equity of our school, as well as improving social, emotional, and academic outcomes for every student at Meadowvale. And so with that, I hope you have a better understanding, or it kind of just refreshed your memory on what is positive behavior interventions and supports.